Before machines were trusted with decisions, judgment belonged entirely to humans, not as a concept, but as daily labor. Every approval, every rejection, every classification required human presence. In early modern societies, decisions moved at the speed of people. Clerks reviewed documents by hand. Managers relied on memory and experience. Records were written, stored, and retrieved manually. Information existed only where humans could physically reach it. This system worked as long as scale remained limited. When organizations were small, judgment was manageable. When data was scarce, memory was enough. But the 20th century changed the rules. Populations grew, cities expanded, governments became administrative machines, corporations turned global. Suddenly, decisions multiplied faster than human attention could handle. A single government agency processed millions of records. A single company managed thousands of employees, suppliers, and transactions. Every record required evaluation. Every evaluation required time. Human judgment became the bottleneck. Two clerks reviewing the same case could reach different conclusions, not because one was wrong, but because judgment is contextual. Mood mattered, fatigue mattered, experience mattered. From an institutional perspective, this variability was dangerous. Inconsistency created disputes. Delays created costs. Unpredictability eroded trust. Organizations didn't want better people. They wanted predictable outcomes. Human memory is selective. It forgets. It prioritizes. It reconstructs. But modern institutions required perfect recall. Every record had to be accessible. Every decision had to be defensible. Every action had to be repeatable. Human cognition was never designed for this level of precision. Before automation, institutions tried to impose order manually. Forms became standardized. Procedures were documented. Decision rules were written down. But enforcement was inconsistent. Interpretation varied. Rules depended on who applied them. The system still relied on people to interpret structure. Somewhere inside large organizations, a new idea began to form. What if decisions could be broken into steps? What if judgment could be predefined? What if outcomes could be produced without interpretation? This was not about intelligence, it was about control. Somewhere inside large organizations, a new idea began to form. What if decisions could be broken into steps? What if judgment could be predefined? What if outcomes could be produced without interpretation? This was not about intelligence, it was about control. By the early 20th century, institutions faced a quiet crisis. They were drowning in information. Decision speed could not keep up with complexity. Human judgment, once sufficient, became unreliable at scale. The problem was no longer how to decide. It was who should decide. The modern world didn't ask whether machines could think. It asked something far more practical. Can judgment be engineered? Can decisions be designed before they are needed? IBM would answer yes. IBM did not set out to make machines intelligent. Its real ambition was far more practical. IBM wanted to make decisions repeatable. In the early 20th century, machines were everywhere. Calculators added numbers. Typewriters accelerated writing. Filing systems organized paper. But these were tools. They assisted human judgment. They did not replace it. IBM introduced something different. Not a faster tool, but a system. At the center of IBM's early power was a simple object, the punch card. A small rectangle of paper, rigid, standardized, unforgiving. Each card represented a record. Each column represented a variable. Each hole encoded a predefined condition. There was no ambiguity. A whole either existed or it did not. Reality had to be translated into binary form before it could enter the system. Punch cards forced institutions to define their world in advance. Categories had to be agreed upon. Exceptions had to be excluded or redesigned. If something could not be categorized, it could not be processed. And if it could not be processed, it effectively did not exist. This was not a technical limitation. It was a philosophical one. Decisions no longer happened at the moment of review. They happened earlier during the system design. Someone had to decide which data matters, which conditions trigger action, which outcomes are allowed. Once these rules were encoded, judgment was no longer situational. It was structural. IBM systems introduced workflows. Information moved through predefined stages: validation, sorting, evaluation, output. Each stage reduced uncertainty. Each stage removed discretion. By the time a result appeared, the decision had already been made by the system's logic. Governments were among the first adopters. Census data, tax records, population management. IBM systems could process millions of records faster and more consistently than any human workforce. Corporations followed: payroll, inventory, compliance, logistics. The appeal was simple. Systems did not argue. They did not reinterpret rules. They did not get tired. Over time, something subtle changed. Decisions stopped being personal. Outcomes felt objective. When a system approved a request, it felt neutral. When it rejected one, it felt final. Responsibility became abstract. No single person could be blamed or praised. The system had spoken. Humans were still present, but their role changed. They prepared data. They maintained machines. They handled exceptions. Core judgment lived inside the process. IBM did not dominate by force. It dominated by becoming invisible. Once an institution reorganized itself around IBM systems, removing them became unthinkable. Decisions depended on them. Operations depended on them. Authority flowed through them. At first, machines followed rules. But the rules grew longer, more conditional, more layered. And eventually, following rules began to look exactly like making choices. By the mid-20th century, IBM systems were no longer simply processing information. They were evaluating it. Early systems followed simple instructions. If a condition was met, an action followed. But institutions demanded more. Decisions were rarely binary. They involved thresholds, comparisons, priorities. IBM systems evolved to handle layered logic, multiple conditions, nested rules, sequential evaluation. What emerged was decision logic. Information no longer moved in a straight line. It branched. If this condition is true, go here. If not, move elsewhere. These structures, decision trees, allowed machines to select outcomes, not randomly, not creatively, but systematically. The decisions machines made were rarely dramatic. They did not appear important. Eligibility, priority ranking, approval routing, resource allocation. But these decisions happened millions of times per day, across governments, across corporations, across institutions. Scale turned routine judgment into social infrastructure. Humans were not removed completely, they were reassigned. Systems handled the majority. Humans handled exceptions, cases that did not fit the model. This created a powerful illusion that humans were still in charge. That judgment remained human. In reality, most outcomes were never reviewed. They were accepted by default. Systems learned indirectly, not through intelligence, but through reinforcement. When a decision path worked, it was preserved. When it caused friction, it was adjusted. Over time, systems optimized for smooth operation, not fairness, not understanding, smoothness. Data gained a new status. It was no longer descriptive, it was decisive. Numbers felt neutral, quantified inputs felt objective, human explanations felt subjective by comparison. When data contradicted experience, experience lost. Institutions did not just use systems. They reorganized around them. Departments were reshaped to feed data efficiently. Processes were aligned to reduce exceptions. Human behavior adapted to system logic. People learned how systems evaluated them and adjusted their actions accordingly. When decisions were automated, responsibility dispersed. No single individual could explain an outcome fully. The logic was embedded, distributed, documented, but rarely questioned. Errors were not blamed on people, they were blamed on configuration. The system was never wrong, it was only misaligned. Automated judgment removed pause. Decisions arrived instantly. There was no time for reflection, no space for reconsideration. Speed created trust. Trust reduced oversight. The most profound change was not technical, it was psychological. Decision-making stopped feeling human. It felt mechanical, inevitable. When outcomes are consistent, questioning them feels unnecessary. Machines did not become human. Humans adapted to machine logic. And once institutions learned to operate without human hesitation, returning felt impossible. Decision-making had been automated, but something deeper had changed. Authority no longer needed a face. By the late 20th century, automated decision-making was no longer a novelty. It was infrastructure. Decisions no longer appeared as isolated moments. They were embedded inside layered systems, databases, validation engines, rule-based processors, output modules. A modern decision passed through multiple layers before a human ever noticed it. And most of the time, no human ever did. Institutions often claimed humans were still involved. Human in the loop. Oversight. Review mechanisms. In practice, human involvement was conditional. Only when systems failed, only when exceptions appeared, only when outcomes were challenged. Most decisions flowed uninterrupted, approved, denied, routed, logged. Trust in systems was not ideological, it was operational. Automated decisions were faster, cheaper, consistent, auditable. For large institutions, this was irresistible. Systems reduced uncertainty. They stabilized outcomes. They made organizations predictable. Predictability requires simplification. Reality must be reduced to variables, categories, thresholds. Context disappears. Nuance fades. Edge cases accumulate quietly. The system does not notice them. It only processes inputs. Decision systems are designed for a moment in time, with assumptions, with priorities, with constraints. When reality shifts, systems lag behind, but they continue operating with confidence. Outdated logic still produces outcomes, and those outcomes still carry authority. Decision systems are designed for a moment in time, with assumptions, with priorities, with constraints. When reality shifts, systems lag behind, but they continue operating with confidence. Outdated logic still produces outcomes, and those outcomes still carry authority. Decision systems are designed for a moment in time, with assumptions, with priorities, with constraints. When reality shifts, systems lag behind, but they continue operating with confidence. Outdated logic still produces outcomes, and those outcomes still carry authority. Some institutions attempt correction, hybrid models, manual reviews, ethical guidelines. But these changes rarely alter the core architecture. They sit on top of systems, not inside them. The logic remains automated. IBM did not create control. It created delegation. Humans learned to delegate judgment to structured processes. At first, cautiously, later, habitually. Delegation became normalization. Today, decisions are environmental, like infrastructure, like climate. We move through them, adapt to them, rarely question them, until they fail. The 20th century did not eliminate human judgment. It relocated it from moments to architecture. The systems deciding today were designed yesterday by people who are often forgotten. The question now is not whether machines decide. They already do. The question is, do we still understand the systems deciding for us, or have we forgotten how judgment was ever human? Subscribe and learn the untold truths about the people and events that shaped the 20th century.